Like you can have the stats, you can be in the room with these guys, but it's so random and you just never know. You can't count Sean Strickland out. Like as much as on paper as I can say Izzy is so much better than him, he's more skilled, he's just everything about him is better. You can't count Sean Strickland out because of the randomness of MMA and the skills that Sean possesses and his mentality for fighting.
What's up, everybody? Laura Sanko here with Dean Thomas, getting ready to talk about UFC 293 going down in Sydney, Australia. Main event, Sean Strickland taking on the champion Israel Adesanya. And what a doozy is this fight, Dean? But first, that hat, though, that hat.
You know, I represent, man. I got the one. I represent Laura Sanko to the fullest. Everybody be sweating my hat because I wear it everywhere I go. And I always be telling people, you want to get one, you got to go to Laura Sanko's website.
I was talking to the team. They're not available for sale yet, but that might be something that's coming down the pipe in the future. So,
well, I didn't know if they was for sale or not, but I'm always hustling for you. Always,
yeah, I know. I
can't make
appreciate
you
that.
$1.
As of now, it is a Dean Thomas exclusive, but in the future we might be opening that up. So, thank you for pumping that up in anticipation.
I got you.
Dean, I like this fight. I'm sad you're not going to be in Australia with me. I'm actually about to, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to skedaddle to the airport, but this should be a good fight.
It should be a good fight. I mean, I think it could be a lot closer than what many people might be giving it credit for.
Yeah.
And you can't take Sean Strickland lightly because I'm sure as weird as it may seem, it's hard to find guys to mimic Sean Strickland in practice.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hard for Izzy to kind of find guys that he can work with like that. So it could be an interesting fight. I mean, it's a good fight. I love the fact that Izzy just takes these fights so quickly and doesn't, negotiate for months before.
Yeah, one of the more active champions I feel like we've seen in a long time. He wants to be in there all the time. The rematch with Pereira was right away. This fight's right away. I love it too. I love it.
I mean, it could have been anybody. It could have been Dricus du Plessis. I mean, Izzy, all those guys from City Kickboxing, I can't say enough about their level of activity and their frequency. Yeah. Those guys love to fight, and they are a blessing. I don't know if MMA even deserves those guys.
You know, that's a good point. That gym as a whole that's a really good way to put it, because the mark that they've made on the landscape of this sport is just undeniable. Them as a team, as individuals as well, but then when you look at them as a team and Eugene Behrman and the rest of the guys as coaches, they've more than made their mark in this sport, and it's really impressive to see. And this card in particular is basically City Kickboxing versus the world. It's crazy how many CKB guys are on here. I think it's like 6. Is that right?
I mean, Blood Diamond is on here. Like,
I know.
How could you not love Blood Diamond?
Right?
His name alone.
If you almost, I don't think he's legally changed it, but like, if that's your name on all your paperwork with the UFC, that's badass. If your name is Blood. All right. Before we go down too many rabbit holes, let me read some of the stats out on this particular matchup in the main event, because I think there's some really interesting talking points here that we can dive into. So obviously Izzy a little bit taller, 6'4" versus 6'1" for Sean Strickland. Izzy will have a 4-inch reach advantage. And let's see here. Orthodox versus switch. Of course, we know that. Strikes landed per minute. This is where I think it gets a little interesting. So Israel Adesanya, 3.94 significant strikes landed per minute. Sean, 5.86. Defense is actually slightly higher for Sean Strickland, 63.0%, which is a tremendously high statistic, and I think will be important for this fight. But then you look at strikes absorbed per minute, and Izzy's down all the way at 2.88 significant strikes absorbed per minute, and Sean's up at 4.28. So it's interesting that he's got such a high defense stat, and yet at the same time has a fairly high strikes absorbed per minute stat. I found that really interesting. Takedown defense, we'll talk about whether we think this is going to factor in this fight at all or not, but just to put it out there, Israel Adesanya, 77.9% takedown defense. Sean Strickland, 84.0. And it's interesting because although these guys are both strikers, they operate very differently, of course. Israel Adesanya, much more variety in his targets. He only targets 50% of his shots to the head, 18 to the body, 31 to the leg. So really heavy leg attack. And for Sean, 83.5% to the head, 11 to the body, and 5.3% to the leg. Sean really does not kick all that much. And I think that that could be a tough thing for him in this particular matchup. Distance, they both are almost primarily distance strikers, although I would argue that their interpretation of distance is slightly different because Sean likes to stand right in guys' faces. Sean, a little bit higher on the takedowns attempted, of course, but that's just to give a little bit of context there in terms of the way that these guys approach fight. But I kind of want to start first with like, because I think we're going to see a huge clash of personalities during fight week. So we can talk about how they approach a fight, but I think how they approach life actually informs how they approach fighting as well. And for Sean in particular, I don't know if you agree with me, and feel free to disagree. It's almost like his attitude to life has influenced his attitude to fighting.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, that is exactly what it's like. He's almost as if he fights as if he's pissed off and because he was forced to fight.
Yeah.
So he just like doesn't care and he just goes out there and fights his hardest. But when you talk about their personalities clashing, their personalities aren't really all that different. They're pretty similar in terms of very outspoken, lack of social cues in terms of what people think about them.
Yeah.
And I kind of love it. And I kind of think that at some level, they're kind of good for the sport. For as bad as we might think they are for the sport, they're very good for the sport because they're kind of directing.
Yeah.
Which, they're directors in the sport. Like they're going to be on the front line speaking about the sport, even if it's not about the sport, because they're on the front line talking and they're on the front line showing everybody what MMA is about. Because when you think about it, I mean, Izzy and Sean Strickland, they're not afraid to get out and talk.
Yeah.
Some fighters are afraid to get out and talk. They want to be behind the scenes and just show up and fight. But you got to love Izzy and Sean Strickland and their personalities for getting out there and doing it. But like you said, there is still kind of a representation of how they fight as well.
Yeah.
Because Izzy, you can tell he cares about life. So he fights with a little bit more caution and he's not afraid to fight, but he fights with a little bit more caution because he cares about life. Sean Strickland seems like he doesn't care about life.
Yeah,
he doesn't fight with no caution.
I don't know if you had a chance to watch the countdown yet, but there was a moment in there that like kind of made me tear up, to be honest with you. And Sean's not a guy who gets emotional, but you can tell he's got a lot to get emotional about if he would ever let himself get there. And they touch on it in the countdown, his upbringing and just how crazy it was. But he said, his first fight, he said it was the first time I ever felt true happiness. And you could tell he meant it. And it kind of broke my heart to hear that. But I think that when you watch him fight and you see it's such a cathartic thing for him, I feel like that's what I see when I watch Sean Strickland fight, which is why those moments where like in the Abus fight where it was clear that the finish was coming and Sean's not like a major power striker. He's going to drown you with, he's going to cut you to death, death by 1,000 paper cuts. You could see the finish coming a mile away though, because there was Abus was just having a really hard time getting his footing back in the fight. And this look, and I think I mentioned it on the commentary, this look on Sean Strickland's face just struck me. It's like he lives for that moment of feeling powerful, because I think he spent his entire childhood feeling completely powerless to the circumstances around him. And I know I'm kind of armchair psychoanalyzing here, and I don't mean to, project or whatever on him, but that's what I see when I look at him. And I think that's why he fights the way he does, is because he doesn't, it's not that he doesn't care. I know what you're saying in terms of like, he doesn't care about life. Cause I agree with you. He's a very like, screw it attitude, but there's that cathartic nature to like needing to exercise those demons that are still, they're buried further now, I think, but they're in there,
Well, when you think about it, most fighters have some traumatic experiences that fuel them to go out there and get inside of a cage and fight another human being in front of a jeering crowd, right? So
Yeah.
it takes a special person to do that. Sean Strickland might be a more extreme case in terms of what the trauma that he probably had as a child and has grown up with. So for sure, I'm sure that getting in there and fighting and being able to let it out is helpful for him. And that's what he does. Like, he lets it out. Like, he just gets in there and goes, I'm going to let this out.
Yeah. And that I love watching the clips where we've had guys talk to guys in fights, right? But it's usually like in the lulls. Sean will talk to you in the midst of like a 4-punch combination in the pocket. Like, it's crazy to see. And that's where I see those moments. Again, it's just like he's telling guys, no, stand here in the middle, get in the middle, let's go. Like, directing them. He wants them to get angry back at him so that it can be a real actual fight and not a contest.
Right. Like when he fought Jack Marshman, and that was
Yes.
in the apex where he's just like, come on, Jack. Come
Yeah.
on, Jack. And I mean, it's kind of weird to watch, but you could definitely see some type of, in a way, therapy
Yeah.
going on for him. And I don't want to say that MMA helps guys and it's therapeutic, but in a way, I think that is some therapy for him. I mean, it may not be the answer to fix his problems, but it is some therapy for him to be able to get out there and to do this and do it legally, right? Because imagine what a guy like Sean Strickland could be doing if he didn't have this outlet in order to express himself.
Says he says that openly. He absolutely, admits to he could see his life going a very different direction if he didn't have this outlet. And on the flip side for Izzy, he's got a fascinating mental game as well. But there was one moment that stuck out to me. It was the press conference. I think it was his first fight against Alex, the one where Sean was there in the back row. And he starts right.
Like, I do. Yeah, I remember.
Calm down. You're gonna break a nail. I love how he's so gravelly. Sean is.
Yeah.
A vocal
what's going on in that voice box?
I know, right? Like, anybody with any amount of vocal coaching is like, oh God, don't do that to yourself. But when he's like, oh, you're gonna break a nail or whatever, there's a moment where like Izzy looks genuinely irritated because I think there's a part. And again, maybe I'm reading too much in this. I feel like there's a part of Izzy where it's like Sean reminds him of the guys that used to bully him. And he's just so annoyed by it. Like, how are you even here with as limited a striking skill set as you have? How are you here? And how are you barking so loud at me in this juncture? And I think he's just like so annoyed by it. And I wonder if that's not something Sean can use to his advantage this week.
I don't know. I don't know how much that's going to help. I think Izzy's a very tough guy. He's
100%.
He's a tough shell to crack in terms of mentally.
Yeah.
I think he's very mentally strong, which is why he's able to do the things that he does and say the things that he says.
Let's talk a little bit about the fight, I guess. And, the general consensus out there is that, how on earth is Sean Strickland going to win this fight? But I think to what you alluded to earlier and some of the things I see and have seen in other fights, this is the same conversation that we were having about Dricus du Plessis versus Robert Whittaker, was it not? Now, I think the argument can be made that there's a little bit more randomness you can inject into Dricus du Plessis' ability to go out there and win a fight because he is so powerful. He's got that eraser in his hand, and Sean doesn't really have the eraser necessarily. But time and time again, this sport will prove to its players and its fans that the margin of error is not what we believe it to be. It is much, much, much smaller.
I am, for the first time, going to watch football because I feel like I can't be any worse at like predicting football than I am at MMA. Because in terms of predicting the way MMA fights are going to turn out, it's almost impossible because you just never know.
Yeah.
Like, you can have the stats, you can be in the room with these guys, but it's so random and you just never know. You can't count Sean Strickland out. Like, as much as on paper as I can say Izzy is so much better than him, he's more skilled, he's just everything about him is better. You can't count Sean Strickland out because of the randomness of MMA and the skills that Sean possesses and his mentality for fighting, his penchants for violence is there where he can stay in this fight long enough to give himself a very legitimate chance.
Yeah. I think to me, what it comes down to is Sean Strickland's not going to win a kickboxing match against Israel Adesanya, but Sean Strickland definitely can win a fight. And he's got to make it a fight because that's where Sean thrives. And, you know, there are aspects to his game. And I loved what you said earlier about how he would be very difficult to prepare for because very few people fight like Sean Strickland. Very few people stand at that particular range, which frankly is going to be right on the end of Izzy's range, and have the chutzpah, the guts, the brazenness to just stay there and believe in, you know, your shoulder roll and believe in your parry and believe in your ability to read and flinch and react and land enough volume to start to chip away at a striker like Israel Adesanya. He drowns people in volume and pressure. I think where a lot of analysts have, you know, the flip side to that is we've seen Izzy pressured before and it never goes well for the opponent, right?
Well, I mean, that's the flip side, right? So like Izzy could go out there and make this look really easy. Like he could go out there and just be like, bing, 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 like laser sharp. And I won't be surprised. Like I'll go, okay, that's
100%.
probably what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But then I also wouldn't be surprised if he has a hard time finding Sean Strickland, because the one thing about Sean Strickland is this, like he doesn't necessarily look good in what he's doing, but his ability to be effective in what he's doing to another person is always there.
Yeah.
He judges distance very well. He doesn't allow himself, while he likes to stay in your face, he won't allow himself to let you punch him in the face easily. Like he'll get out of the way really quick and roll with the punches and put his arms up in a flailing manner.
Really hard to hit clean. Really hard to hit clean.
Yeah. So, I mean, he reminds me of kind of like Chris Lytle. I remember Chris Lytle, watching Chris Lytle shadow box was like, oh my goodness. But then he'd get in there and just go to wars with guys and with really good strikers, and they wouldn't be able to do nothing to him. And like Sean Strickland is kind of the new version of that. Like he's very difficult to figure out, a puzzle that's hard to figure out, and he doesn't do much. And that's the problem. It's not that he does a lot that you can't figure out. It's the little stuff that he does that you just kind of don't expect. And you're like, this should be easy for me. Like I should be able to pick this guy apart. And yet you can't do it. I think I'm not sure Izzy has that, you know, but Izzy does have the accuracy to be able to steal this fight. Yeah. He doesn't necessarily have the power like Pereira did, but he has the accuracy to be able to touch him and steal it if he can touch him. But that's going to be the hard part, touching that chin of Strickland.
Well, yes, he's really hard to hit clean. I think that's one of the skills that Sean has honed, not because he was taught it, but because he learned it through, you know, trial and error, through years and years of sparring hard nearly every day. I'm sure, you know, 5+ rounds. And so you develop a different skill set than you would if you're working combinations in clean drills where you're repeating the drill over and over and over. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I would tend to think that the drilling is, to be honest with you. But Sean has a particular type of skill set and approach that has been developed through the way that he has trained for so long. One of the things I guess I'm going to be interested to see, because it would be easy to say, well, this is going to play out just like his fight with Pereira, right? Like he's facing a bigger, more technical, probably slightly more powerful, although I agree that Pereira is more powerful than Izzy, but I think Izzy might be more powerful than Sean Strickland. It'd be easy to say, well, the same thing is going to happen. And I'm dying to see if Sean has decided to learn from those moments, right? Because he's talked about how when they were walking out for the Pereira fight, Eric was like, okay, we're going to shoot right away, right? And Sean was already thinking, well, just let me know when it's halfway. Let me know when the round is halfway. Like the plan was always to shoot early and to really mix in the grappling against Pereira. And he just didn't do it, like willingly, consciously did not do it. And I don't know if that was a ego thing. I don't know if that was a fear of getting tired thing. I don't know what it was, but I think that Sean Strickland is a more dangerous fighter for Israel Adesanya, having lost the way he did to Alex Pereira.
For sure, maybe. So I remember prior to that fight, I said, there's no way Sean Strickland is going to stand in front of Alex Pereira. And I told this to Lionheart, Anthony Smith, and I said, there's no way. I said, no one is that stupid. And he looked at me dead in the eye and said, he's that stupid. He's gonna stand with him. He's that stupid. I said, there's no way. And then he did. And I was like, I can't believe it. He can't be that stupid. So then I'm thinking of this fight, thinking of strategy for this fight. Would it be beneficial for him to take Izzy down? One, I'm not sure he could. Yeah. Right. If Izzy is prepared for it. I don't know if Izzy's going to be prepared for it, but I think that Sean Strickland would be a better fighter and a better martial artist if he did utilize some other things, because he's so good at judging distance and so good at just quote unquote fighting that if he added a couple of technical elements to his game, it would only enhance his ability to win fights. But it's easier to kind of figure him out when you only have to worry about a couple different things. And at the highest level, you kind of need some things. Yeah. So I think that he would be better served if he was shooting takedowns in this fight than as if he wasn't.
Or even not necessarily even, blast doubles in the open mat, just tie-ups along the fence,
for sure.
clinching, just make it a little bit more of a messy physical fight than a kickboxing match.
For sure. And even though I do think that his style of striking, I don't even want to say kickboxing, but his style of striking can still be difficult because the way he stands, he should be able to check the leg kicks because he stands so tall. He should be imbalanced to be able to check leg kicks. Will he check them? I'm not sure he will. And if he doesn't, I think that'll be a problem. But if he does, that could be a problem for Izzy. If he's like checking the leg kicks and sliding out of the way and not allowing Izzy a lot of targets to hit, that could be a problem for Izzy.
Do you think there's any possibility that Izzy would underestimate an opponent like Sean? Or do you think he's too good and too tuned in mentally?
Yeah, I think at this point,
slip like that.
I think at this point, he's tuned in enough to go, I can't let this guy beat me. Yeah. There's no way I'm going to let this guy beat me. And I think that and for Izzy, having lost to Pereira and then winning in the rematch from going back on that grind and going back in the gym and allowing, because, Eugene Berriman was very vocal about saying that, he thought Izzy, wasn't really giving it his all at times. And he had to kind of check him a few times. And being checked a few times, going into a fight like this after being checked a few times, you're not going to want to lose to Sean Strickland. There's no way you can lose to Sean Strickland. Yeah.
What do you think Sean's best? If you can sit there and imagine a world where Sean wins this fight, what's it look like?
I think, Sean's not I don't know if Sean, mechanically, he doesn't look great mechanically when he's throwing punches, right? So that's why he doesn't have a lot of power, because his elbows are kind of flailing around, and which also makes it difficult to block sometimes. And it's a good defense for him because his arms are all over the place.
Well, he doesn't have an athletic base. He's so upright that there's no power from his legs. Yeah. So I think that he could steal rounds. I think he could kind of activity, like keeping rounds close, and then like having a couple of big moments in the rounds where he stole them, where it's like, or this fight is close, but you know what? Sean might be winning. And then he stole the first 3 rounds. Then Izzy's trying to catch up in the end, and Sean is like just keeping it messy, and then it just kind of looks like that. Where like Izzy's like, man, I don't know why I can't get my hands on this guy, but he's hard to hit. And then when I make a mistake, he hits me. Yeah. When I reach for him because he's backing up with the shoulder roll, and I reach for him, he comes back with something and counters me, and he hits me. Like, that's a very realistic possibility in this fight, where just Sean keeps it close and then steals the bigger moments of the rounds and wins the rounds. But I can't see him beating Izzy up like that. Knocking him out, yeah.
Yeah, I can't see him knocking Izzy out or beating him up. I think that he could steal the rounds.
I think, the majority of Sean's highlight reel footage, and there's some really good stuff on it, has come because his opponents were not prepared for the pressure and the pace and the cardio that they would have to have. Like Abus Magomedov, I think he felt really good after that first round in terms of like what he did. he was really forcing Sean on the back foot, landed some big shots. And then the second round, I think he expected Sean to like decrease at the same level he had decreased in terms of output, and Sean just stayed exact same.
Well, you got to imagine, and you said it earlier, it's the fact that he trains that way. Like he fights probably the same way he trains. And what people don't understand, and that's not that he's like in better cardio, like his VO max is higher than anybody else's. He just understands his body and knows how to manage his energy output. And that's really what cardio is. I don't care what any strength and conditioning coach says at the end of the day. Cardio really comes down to managing your output. Like if you can't, like you can be in the greatest shape of your life, but if you can't manage your output, you're always going to get tired. And the reality is that Sean Strickland has really keyed in on how to manage his output as a fighter. And that is to throw with the intensity that he throws with, do what he does, and just not allow anybody to put him in an uncomfortable position.
Yeah. You know, I asked him outright one time when it was during International Fight Week at the Expo, and we happened to be walking to the bathroom at the same time. So we were chatting. And I was like, man, I got to ask you, because I've always wondered, like, why do you never grapple? Because like everybody talks about how good your grappling is. I've seen you grapple. Like, why do you never use it? It's the same thing as Justin Gaethje. Like, how are you a D1 wrestler and you never wrestle? And he gave the same answer that Justin gave essentially one time in an interview. And he's like, oh, you know, like I could, but you just always got to wonder with those big guys, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I thought that was a really interesting response that made me think he's not as comfortable managing his grappling gas tank as he is his striking gas tank. He's got the skills, in particular in the jiu-jitsu, maybe not quite in the wrestling realm, but in the jiu-jitsu in particular. But maybe just a slightly less confident about making sure he is efficient in those moments and doesn't get up from a grappling exchange and go, oh shit, that drained me as much as it did the other guy.
And that's probably why we don't see it, because as you see him, he's always at the same pace. He's just walking forward, shoulder rolling, walking forward, jab, 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 maybe a front kick up the middle, counter right hands. I mean, that's just the way he fights. And if you can't take him out of that, he's never going to get tired. I don't care who in the world he fights. He will never get tired if you allow him to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So I asked you about the possibility of Sean winning. What's the most likely scenario of what this fight's going to look like?
The most likely scenario that this fight looks like is that Izzy picks him apart. I mean, it starts off, the first round is kind of competitive. You know, Izzy just not throwing a lot, just moving side to side, touching a little bit. Yeah, kicking, touching a little bit. By the halfway in the second round, Izzy's going to start touching him up. And then I think Izzy eventually lights him up.
Yeah.
Like by the fourth round, if it goes to the fifth, if it goes to the fifth, Izzy's going to be lighting him up.
Yeah.
That's most likely what's going to happen in this fight. 9 times out of 10, that's probably, maybe I'd say 7 times out of 10, that's probably what happens in this fight.
So you're calling like a TKO late?
Could be a TKO late with Izzy, or Izzy just riding away with the win, just putting on a show for the people in Australia. That's probably what it looks like. Izzy putting on a show. Yeah.
Well, I can't say I necessarily disagree with you, but I do think that it could be a competitive fight, and I'm excited. I hope that's what we get. I hope we get a fight where everybody goes, "Oh shoot, Sean Strickland! Like we didn't give his skill sets enough credit for how he does few things, but he does them so well."
Well, I mean, if you go back and watch his fight against Imavov, Nasruddin Imavov, man, Nasruddin is a great fighter on the outside, but he was forced to fight Sean Strickland's fight and couldn't keep up. Like you know, when they say, don't argue with the idiot, they'll drag you down into their level and beat you at their own game. Yeah. But that's exactly what Sean Strickland did to Imavov. Because Imavov is a really clean, smooth striker, but he just could not help himself but to fight Sean Strickland's fight. And he got beat up in the process. Yeah.
I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to go to Sydney. It's going to be a lot of fun. I wish you were coming, Dean, but hopefully the angel Dean Thomas will be watching from afar.
I'll be on your shoulder. I'll be on your and congratulations on on the
Thank you.
broadcasting gig or commentary on the
Thank you.
pay-per-view. The first working the pay-per-view. So
Yes.
congratulations. It's gonna be just like all the rest of them in terms of like what you have to do. So don't let
Yeah.
it get to you. I
I
know
appreciate
sometimes
that.
like work a pay-per-view could get to people, but don't let it get to you. Handle your business. You're the best, champ.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go handle my business. I appreciate the pep talk as always. Thank you so much for your time. And guys, keep it locked in right here. Dean and I are also going to break down the co-main event, so don't miss it.